It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 540 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Joining me on the show today is John Rossman. John's the author of a couple of really interesting books, including The Amazon Way on IoT, the Internet of Things, 10 Principles for Every Leader from the World's Leading Internet of Things Strategies, and the second one, The Amazon Way, 14 Leadership Principles Behind the World's Most Disruptive Company. And today, John and I are going to talk about the importance of principles in sales as opposed to just methods and process. And specifically, we're going to talk about some of the principles that Amazon has used to build such an incredibly diverse company and one that's just passionately committed to supporting their customers. We'll talk about how you can apply some of these same principles to grow your sales and to grow your company. If you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, go to andypaul.com/540, episode 540. There you'll find a timestamp breakdown of this and all conversations on Accelerate. Make sure you check that out. And if you like Accelerate, which I'm sure you do, it'd really help us out if you subscribed, left us a review. Love to get feedback from you about what we can do to make this a more valuable investment of your time. So let's dive right into it. John Rossman, welcome to Accelerate.
Andy, thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. So I lead off my interviews with a standard question. It's almost sort of like my little research project here, and it's I did one before. I have released a report actually with 300 answers about sort of how to initiate a sales turnaround from guests on my show. So this one is now the question is, what's in your mind? What's the single biggest challenge that sales professionals face today?
Well, I think more and more, I think buyer sophistication has increased, and buyers are well aware that, especially technology solutions, like there's so much that goes around beyond the technology to make successful implementation. And so I think it's really being able to understand not just kind of your product or your tool and the speeds and feeds and the features of it and all of that, but it's really setting both the case and the right environment so that implementation can be successful. And so I think it's more sophisticated, and you have to understand things well beyond kind of whatever the thing is that you happen to be representing.
So making sure that you as a sales professional are developing your broader business acumen in order to engage in the right level of conversation with your buyer.
That's right. And help, and especially if your product or service has a complex implementation to it, it's about prepping your implementation partner to be successful in their work, helping your client be ready for that implementation, and really setting the basis for adoption, right? Because all of these things are about adoption. So it's not even implementation isn't even the objective. The objective is impact and adoption and use and changing that business case.
Change management.
Change management, exactly. And I think that there's so much that can be done from the very onset about defining what that is, keeping it as simple as possible, staying focused on the things that really matter. I think the notion of being agile and the minimally viable product has a role in how do we successfully implement things so that they don't become big monolithic implementations. All of those things, sales professionals in my mind really aren't sales professionals. They're just one aspect of being a problem solver for your client, and that problem solving doesn't stop when the contract is signed.
Yeah, well, it's sort of interesting because in certain segments of the sales industry, sales profession such as there's still this heavy reliance on sort of positioning people as closers. And it's funny, there's sort of this second wave coming now of people talking about the importance of sellers being customer-centric in a way that, addresses many of the boxes you talked about in terms of the change management issue, the transformation issues, understanding things from the buyer's perspective. And yet that's not really new, right? I mean, we can go back to Michael Bosworth and books published, 2 decades ago that really started talking about this, but it seems like it's hard to take hold and stay. It seems like we sort of go through these waves. I mean, interesting what your take is on that.
Well, I don't know if I know the full answer to that, but I think one thing that's adding to the fuel of this kind of challenge is that as more and more solutions become on demand and subscription based, that clients truly do, and they become like Amazon Web Services, where you can scale up and scale down and all of that. You really do have more skin in the game as an account developer to make sure that adoption is taking hold. And so I think that the evolution of how technology and data solutions are deployed also plays a role in putting more and more emphasis on achieving the business outcomes, not just getting to a contract.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we'll talk about that here coming up. So as sort of a preface, you've written a series of books on sort of generally titled The Amazon Way on a variety of different topics. So, excuse me, tell me what you meant by the Amazon Way, what inspired it, and how you got there.
Sure. So I'm a partner at a consulting firm now called Alvarez & Marsal. I have been for 12 years. Prior to A&M, I was a senior leader at Amazon. I got to run two businesses. I launched and scaled the marketplace business, and then I ran the enterprise services business, where we ran other large retailers' e-commerce infrastructure. So I had responsibility for Target and Toys R Us and a number of other great brands. And as I transitioned out of Amazon and into my consulting client work, I just saw the impact that the anecdotes, the strategies, the mindsets had in helping my clients successfully make change. Right?
The mindsets from Amazon and so on. Yeah.
Exactly. And I had one client in particular at the Gates Foundation who actually he ran Bill Gates' two book projects for him, and he was a friend of mine and a neighbor and a client, and he was like, John, you do a really nice job of taking these little stories and putting them into play just at the right moment. You really should think about writing a book. So I talked Greg into helping me do those books. And so the first book is about the 14 leadership principles of Amazon. And these are the strategies and the mindsets and the beliefs of the leaders at Amazon. And the most important thing about those principles is they're not about being a poster on the wall. These are principles that are put into everyday meetings to help drive good decision making and similar priorities and a similar point of view. And then the second book I wrote was on the Internet of Things, and it's called The Amazon Way on IoT. And my sole goal with that book was to help a business leader be able to answer the question, what should my Internet of Things strategy be? And so I kind of walk through the questions you can ask, the principles or the types of strategies that IoT can have in a business, and help the reader go through an exploration of their own situation so that they can build their own strategy and perspective on how connected devices can impact their business. And Amazon just happened to be like the best exemplar of all of those principles. So I just kind of leveraged the brand and called it the Amazon Way on IoT.
Yeah, well, very, very clever marketing. But also, great content of the book, because I'm a huge fan of Jeff Bezos and have quoted him in my own books. And one of the things I thought was really interesting is the book's based on the idea of principles. And there's at the beginning of your book on the Amazon Way on IoT, you've got a great quote from a gentleman named Harrington Emerson, who is a business theorist. And I wanted to read it because I thought it applies and really resonated with me, because the way it applies to so many parts of our business, but sales in particular for people who are listening to this. And the quote is, again, from Harrington Emerson: "As to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods ignoring principles is sure to have trouble." And I'll get into why I thought that was so important, but I wanted to ask you, John, why'd that quote resonate with you so much?
Because I wanted to write something that was more durable than like today's news or the technologies of today's. And because I knew it's in essence an applied strategy book. And this essence of principles I thought was very, very important. And I wanted to explain why I was writing these things and proposing them as principles, because they have that durability that I believe will transcend, momentary time and fads and the technology that go about implementing them.
Yeah, and I think we have, like I said, we have a sales audience. It's predominantly a sales audience. We got some entrepreneurs and so on, and marketing people. But the thing I think that's so key and that struck with me, why this struck a chord with me, is that we're obsessed in sales with methodologies and process. And as you talk about, and as Harrington talks about, Harrington Emerson talks about, is that methods are so situational. But if you have principles, and you refer to this in the book on leadership, principles have a vision. As you mentioned, they're adaptable. I think one of the key things about principles is, as you talked about earlier in the discussion here, is there's a clarity they lend to an operation, to a company, to a team, that is really essential. Because if you're ever in doubt about what you should be doing, your principles lend sort of an unambiguous clarity to it.
And principles, so many teams or companies, they have visions or missions, which I think are really important, but they tend to lack kind of a tactical application capability to them, right? They're tough to insert into every meeting, and rules, you can always bypass rules or find the faults in rules, whereas principles fit that middle ground of they're tactical enough to be able to use, but they're also broad, and when used in good spirit, they're tough to trick, they're tough to fool, and everything, right? And so, principles I just find is a great way at keeping things at the right level, making them simple, making them memorable, making them usable, and then you can adapt, as you're saying, into kind of any circumstance and stuff. And if you can get people to buy into the principles, then you have a lot less debate on the tactics and the change that you're proposing to pursue.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think that's, again, one of the issues we see so much in sales is we have these methods uninformed by principles. And what we see is they fade in effectiveness pretty quickly because, there's no durability to them. And, if you're thinking of this in sales and you've got your sales process and you don't understand what your principles are as an organization, or the principles that you're trying to, events and just how you sell, it's going to be problematic for you in the long run.
That's right.
All right. So sort of leading from that then with the principles is I want to talk some here about Amazon's obsession with the customer. I think it's one of the hallmarks of Amazon, but I think it also offers a lot of lessons to people, audience here. It's primarily made up of B2B sellers, excuse me. And I use a quote from Jeff Bezos in my second book, Amp Up Your Sales, that to my mind is the best quote about sales. It sort of encapsulates what selling is better than anything else I'd ever seen. And it was from a interview I read that he had given in the Harvard Business Review. This is about, 3 so years ago. And his quote was, make sure I get it right, was, we don't make money when we sell things. We make money when we help the customer make a purchase decision. And I just thought, whoa. I mean, that sums it up so quickly because, it's all about helping the customer. If we as sellers don't have helping the customer in the forefront of our mind for everything we do, then, we're never going to perform the way we could.
And there's a number of examples of where they've taken that obsess over the customer, which is the first leadership principle at Amazon, and it's probably the kingpin, the first among equal, where they've taken that and they've driven that to specific capabilities and approaches and features. And I'll talk about just one.
Sure.
And it's a feature that was launched 12, 13 years ago called Search Inside the Book, right? And so it lets a user see a select number of pages within a book and also to search specific quotes. When Amazon was proposing that, the publishing community was in an uproar.
Yeah, I'm sure they hated it.
they hated it. The transparency, like, well, what if the user, the customer doesn't like it? What if the customer prints pages from the book and so they don't end up buying the book? But the fundamental belief that we were able to convince publishers of was that if it's good for the customer and it establishes trust with the customer, over time they will purchase more books. Now, it puts the onus back on publishers and writers to actually create great content. And so there will be more transparency from that. But if customers trust that what they're buying will actually meet their needs, satisfy them, the logic is they will buy more. And so we were able to convince publishers to let us go forward with that. And so Search Inside the Book is a perfect manifestation of where that maniacal obsession about improving the customer experience and establishing trust with the customer and doing moves that are counter-traditional, counterintuitive, are lampooned and made fun of, and the industry doesn't get where it benefits the customer. Typically, those things will win over time.
Yeah, and I love the sort of phrase that you're used in the book, and I presume it comes from Bezos as well, is you say leaders start with the customer and work backwards. So what did he mean by that?
Well, first is you want to build true customer empathy. Like, you actually need to understand, like, what are they going through? What are they trying to solve? What's important to them, both personally as well as from a business. And it also entails understanding your customer broader than exactly where your product or service inserts, right? And so it's, look upstream, look downstream, and understand them. And design things that are designed not because of your organization structure or, what you want to do, but truly build things from the customer backwards. And that's the best way to both build product as well as to manage your business is, from the customer's perspective.
Yeah, and there's lots of I'm thinking of all these examples of ways that you sort of become obsessed with the customer. And I have an example I've talked about in one of my books, and I've talked about, I think, here on the air before, is there's a restaurateur here in New York named Danny Meyer that has a series of very, very successful restaurants. He also started the whole Shake Shack chain. And but he is obsessed with the customer. It's a culture he's built in his organizations, in his restaurants. And I always compare and contrast. I was at a restaurant once in the San Diego area and with a family, and one of my kids had ordered steak and had a fairly large piece of the steak left. And so I asked if they could box it up and take it home, and we got ready to leave. They said, oh, we forgot. We accidentally got rid of that. And, a $40 steak, that's a lot of cost. Right. And the restaurant was sort of absolutely unwilling to do anything about it. Right. It was like, oh, well, can we buy you a glass of wine? Well, we don't want a glass of wine. This was a meal somebody's going to have tomorrow. And then I compare that with my wife and I were at a Danny Meyer restaurant, Gramercy Tavern in New York City, and similar thing. My wife had eaten about half her meal, and she asked if it could be boxed up and taken home. They said absolutely, and just as we were getting ready to leave, the waiter comes over and said, "I'm so sorry, we accidentally threw your meal away. Can you wait another 10 minutes because we're firing up a whole new entree for you to take home?" Now, the difference between those two, I mean, I've never been to that other restaurant again. I used to go to it all the time, the one in San Diego. We've never been to again. But, we'll go off our way to go to a Danny Meyer restaurant because they're obsessed with pleasing the customer and the customer experience.
Yeah, like so many things, there's both kind of a spirit and an empowerment to it, but then there's also like an operational manifestation for it. And one of the types of work that I do with a lot of my clients is they may have the spirit of good customer obsession, or they need to build it more and they're looking for ways to do it. Most companies don't have metrics that actually measure the customer experience. And so I work with my clients on defining from the very top all the way down to very granular metrics, like what are things that you can actually measure about your customer experience, and then drive a culture of continuous improvement to improve those. So at Amazon, we had a metric called the POP metric, which was the perfect order percentage, right? It was an aggregate metric. It meant that the right item got shipped to the right customer, was delivered on time with no issues and no contacts about the order, right? It was a perfect shipment. And then that metric was broken down to 5 metrics, and each of those metrics is broken down, right? And so you can actually re-engineer the customer experience and put metrics in place where you never thought you could have metrics in place to evaluate the customer experience in a more operational manner, to actually build that type of customer obsession and to drive for perfection in the business.
So do you have an example of more of a business to business?
Yeah, I've worked with a big infrastructure, technology infrastructure client of mine. And in their sales and delivery sides of the business,
right,
they have operational metrics and they have month over month financial metrics, but they could not in any way with data answer the question, did my clients have a good day today? And so we implemented and designed a set of metrics that are all about, like, did we get the purchase order correct? Did we hit our timelines on the contract negotiation? These were complex products. Did we ship the right products? Were they received on time? Did they implement successfully? Did we have guarantee and warranty issues? Metrics around all of those things, and then we built a process where cross-functional teams, hopefully ignoring organizational turf, would get together and work and ask what we called the 5 whys. Like, why did these things happen? And so you're driving to the root cause issue so that hopefully you're improving the process over time through that. And so that's an example in a B2B sales and implementation scenario of building metrics that match the customer experience and using those to actually drive change in the organization.
I'm curious, did you have any metrics that talked about the customer experience in the pre-sale stage?
By far the toughest part, one of the things we found was, a lack of good adoption and definition as to, well, what should the pre-sales experience be? And so that's where a lot of the opportunity was, in just helping to define that, and then using the tools and creating some fairly easy kind of mobile hacks so that they could capture that data better, right? Just things like, the number of clarifications or edits or changes needed in proposals. Those types of things at the end of the day start measuring the customer experience. But at the end of the day, especially with sophisticated technology solutions, it's about feeling like you have a partner that, I can trust to help me get to that end goal versus, change order me to death, right? And so a lot of what we measured was the quality of the work that was proposed versus, at the end of the day, what was needed to actually hit success. And when there's a big variance, that means we're not doing a good job in our pre-sales process.
No, I like that. No, that's a really good one. Yeah,
even though lots of times from a traditional basis, hey, getting the PO signed is the absolute goal. It's okay if we have to change order them later on, and everything, right? But that's yesterday's mentality, and that is what drives customers to not trust their solution providers, is exactly the history around kind of change ordering.
Oh yeah, well, so it causes them to churn.
Right.
I mean, I think one of the biggest factors, if not the biggest factor in churn, has to do exactly with that. Change orders in process and so on, which just speaks to, as you said, pre-sale, lousy job in discovery, lousy job in confirming needs with the customer, validating, and so on.
That's right.
So another line I thought was really interesting from Bezos, from the book, and this one resonates, I know, with a lot of people, especially people that maybe travel a lot, is, you quoted him saying he couldn't imagine a world where a customer would want higher price, slower delivery, smaller selection. And, the first thing I thought about when I was reading that was, well, how do the airlines get away with it? But there are industries that sort of almost think that way.
Yeah, the real essence of that discussion, and that was specifically a client meeting that we were on and everything, was figure out like what your durable strategies are in your business. And it just so happened that in Amazon's case, Jeff's firm belief was I can't imagine a world where customers want fewer selection, higher prices, and slower delivery. And those were the durable strategies that Amazon was pursuing. And so the message to the client that we were working with is like, what's your durable strategy to your clients? They're likely not the same things that Amazon was preaching. And that's what I really took from it was like, what's your brand? What's your brand promise? What are the durable assets in your business? And make sure that you understand those golden assets and that you're building them over time. So, it's kind of ridiculous, but one of the real golden assets at Amazon is the item catalog, right? Like that is the essence of selection at Amazon. And we put an unbelievable amount of effort and horsepower and expense when we really needed to cut expense in the business to building a world-class catalog service.
Sure.
Because Jeff believed that was one of the golden assets of the company for a long period of time.
Right. But I was my comment about airlines, you can imagine a world where airline executives are sitting in a room and saying, look, we're going to have skinnier seats, less leg room, we're going to remove bathrooms and so on, which is what they do, right? And it's like, okay, how do they get away with it? They're nominally in competitive businesses, but it's like, it seems like a reverse incentive almost for them.
Yeah, the airline business is a complex business. I do think that there is a big opportunity for airlines to differentiate, to really say, what is my brand? What does my brand stand for? And then B, to keep their service true to whatever their brand promise is. Sometimes it's on time. Sometimes it's low price. Sometimes it's convenient. Sometimes it's comfort and great food. But you can't be all of those likely, right? And I think that so many companies, they try to be everything and they don't shoot for that clarity and commitment on this is what our brand is and here's how it's going to manifest itself to our customers.
And so last question for you as we sort of get into this end game here is oftentimes I work with a lot of companies where you'll see a customer obsession sort of at the middle level, sometimes at the sales rep level, but it's not necessarily always mirrored at the top. And obviously it's not sustainable in that case because the CEO can sort of on whim change what people are doing. But how do the individual contributors, how do the middle management, how do they contribute to this idea of the customer obsession?
Well, I would go back to a few of the basics, which is metrics. Like that there was the entire operational cycle at Amazon is a set of cascading operational metric reviews where you are reviewing metrics, a lot of which represent the customer experience, and you are explaining variation and you are shooting for perfection. And so that's one essence. And regardless of kind of role and level in the company, that's just the tone and tempo from a company like Amazon. And there's other companies that have that same tone and tempo. And then I think the other thing that, and Bezos writes about this in the latest annual report, which I think is some of the best business writing that's out there. And he talks about being careful about managing by proxy. And what he means by that is surveys and what the press is saying about you, and to some degree even sales information. Like those are proxies for things. Make sure you are also out there actually experiencing what the customer is experiencing. So as much as possible, dog food stuff, right? Like eat your own stuff, right? Go out there and meet with customers. Go out there and understand like what is the worst day my customer has and what is the worst day my customer has relative to my product and service, not the best day. So many things get staged for review, like you want to see when it's really ugly. That's where insights are going to come from. So I would just say, regardless of level, like be careful of the proxies that are put in place. You don't get better by always looking at the happy story.
Well, I think that's so true. I mean, just last comment on this is that we see this big trend in certainly in business to business sales towards inside sales, fewer people in the field. But I keep talking to clients about this is one thing you're missing. You do have to get out and actually talk to a customer, right? It's just not just enough just to do it remotely over a phone call or video calls. You actually need to go see what's happening in their business.
And if you want to talk about like building true customer empathy, not just the transaction, like that is exactly what you have to do. And the thing that I've learned as I sell complex change is it's not just about how does the business decision get made, but you have to understand personal motivations and personal pressures that are involved also. And you can only really get a good essence of that when you have a relationship.
Yeah, and you have time with them.
Right.
And I think a lot of that, especially on the relationship over years of selling large complex things as well, is that more often than not, those need to be, quiet moments, two people alone, not just on the phone.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. John, excellent to talk with you. So how can people find out more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, so at my blog, johnrossman.com/accelerate, I've got a couple of treats for you. First, I've got a poster that is a visualization of the 14 leadership principles of Amazon, free for you to download. And I also have a chapter from each one of my books that gives you a good flavor for, the applicability and readability of the books.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, John, pleasure to talk with you. And friends, thank you for spending this time with me today. Remember, come back again, join us tomorrow for another great episode of Accelerate. So thanks for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.